Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Vaishali Jain. I'm thrilled to introduce you to this special episode we created with the New York Hall of Science. In this special presentation, you'll experience an intimate discussion with Ivan Seidenberg, recounting his tenure as the chairman and CEO of Verizon, as detailed in his new book, Verizon Untethered, an insider's story of innovation and disruption. Enjoy the show.
Tonight's event is one in a series brought to you by NYSCi's President's Council. And the council is comprised of donors who have a deep and abiding interest in all things science and who are also passionate supporters of NYSCi's mission. At NYSCi, everything we do is formed by an approach that we call Design Make Play. It's a strategy that engages young people to become empowered users of the tools of science. We're proud of the fact that we engage more than 500,000 visitors a year, that we are home now to the second largest maker fair in the world, and that 2/3 of the young people who participate in our Science Career Ladder program declare science majors upon entry into college. And the President's Council supports all this work and brings together a dynamic network of people to learn about cutting-edge topics in science and technology from thought leaders like the two we have with us tonight. So I want to thank all the President's Council members who are here and all of our trustees for making what we do possible. So tonight's program, it's a special occasion for many of us. Ivan Seidenberg served on NYSCi's board for 27 years, and he was chair and co-chair of the board for 17 of those years. And Ivan, along with Nick D'Onofrio, led the search for my position, and I had the extraordinary opportunity to be mentored by Ivan and Nick during my first 5 years at NYSCi. I was a very lucky person. Ivan's telecommunications career began more than 45 years ago when he joined New York Telephone. And as we know, he later became CEO and chairman of Verizon. And it's the story of Verizon's transformation that we're going to hear more about tonight. Ivan remains active on many boards, including the New York Genome Center and New York-Presbyterian. He is also a trustee at Pace University, which established the Ivan G. Seidenberg School of Computer Science and Information Systems in 2016. And the New York Hall of Science is also proud to honor our top students each year with the Seidenberg Top of the Ladder Award, a tribute to Ivan and his family's long-standing generosity to NYSCi. Tonight, Ivan is joined by David Faber. David is one of the most recognized faces in the business world. He's an award-winning journalist, a New York Times best-selling author, and perhaps best known as CNBC's financial expert writer and market news analyst. He is currently the co-anchor on CNBC's Squawk on the Street, the popular TV show that covers the morning bell and essentially kickstarts each business day. David meets regularly with CEOs and other key business leaders across all industries to get their perspective on the market, which is how he knows Ivan from many years ago. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ivan and David.
Quickly, Margaret, thank you very much for hosting this, and we appreciate it a great deal. And David, thank you for coming.
Thank you for saying that. And Ivan, I've been doing this long enough now that I can consider myself something of an authority when it comes to CEOs. And you were never one, the most self-effacing person, certainly amongst a group of the highest profile CEOs that I know. And yet, I think one of the most successful. And people may not recognize that fully for all the years there in terms of always thinking about the long term at Verizon, strategically, not worrying about the quarter to quarter, certainly caring about the stock price, but nonetheless being able to sort of keep your eye on the long term shape of things to come, how you wanted to position Verizon. And even most importantly, in some ways, also who you were succeeded by. I mean, sometimes we forget, but that is the last thing, but not one of the least important things that CEOs so often do. And now Lowell McAdam is exiting.
Right.
So you're done. Nobody can blame you anymore.
I just said this to somebody. One of the things that an outgoing CEO has to live with is the success of their successor. Now that Lowell has now handed off to somebody else, I'm done. I'm done. And he did a great job, Lowell. And the company's doing great.
Yeah, well, today, I don't know, Verizon reported earnings and the stock was up quite nicely in an otherwise very difficult market. So you'll take credit. Why not, right?
I don't need to take credit.
You never actually have taken. You were never one who would
It's
take
kind of like
credit.
NYSCi. When you think about NYSCi, how well they're doing today, it's great that you can see a generational improvement from the prior generation. So it's good. It's the way it should be.
Let's talk a bit about change, because you certainly saw a great deal of it in your more than 40 years at Verizon. And there's no doubt that change just seems to accelerate constantly. Give me some of your perspective in terms of in the corporate world, now that you're out of it and had some time to reflect on that, and how leaders deal with it. And I know you'll also bring it back to the museum itself as well.
Yeah, so when we thought about that, David, obviously I came from a company that had a 100-year history, the phone company, and the whole idea of the phone company was it was very incremental. You had to learn how to go from year to year to year. And people did a great job doing that. But along the way, the world outside of the phone company changed drastically in terms of new technology, new entrants, government policy. So as we said in the book, we adopted two terms that we thought were good. One was the chessboard. So we used to think about strategy as if you were playing chess. So, and not that any of us were grandmasters in chess, but all of us were amateur chess players. And so what we tried to do is, how did you move the chess pieces so you control the center of the board, and how did you think about 2, 3, 4, 5 steps in advance? And most corporations say they think 2, 3, 4, 5 steps in advance, but they don't. They just think 1 or 2. The next deal or the next product they offer, they don't really think of this in terms of 2, 3, 4 steps. So one was the chessboard strategy, and we worked very hard with our board to engage them in realizing that you make investments today that may pay off in 6 years, you make other investments that might pay off in 3, and you do things right away to help the earnings of the company in the current environment. So building in a long-term perspective was very useful. The other thing is nonlinear thinking. So certainly the people at the hall understand this. When you think about education, you're trying to figure out nonlinear things that you can do that deal with the discontinuity of what goes on. So Amazon disrupts a lot of things, and if you're on the other side of that coin, you have to think of something nonlinear. What do you do to deal with that? So I think in our business, I like to think our company is one of the first that applied the chessboard strategy as well as being nonlinear in the way we approached how we used to go about our business. Now, what you would find probably ironic is if I ever said this to analysts, they would think I was crazy. They would go, "Thank you very much, Ivan. What's your earnings going to be tomorrow morning?" That's what they would do. And so that's the other role of the CEO, is to run interference, is to be the kook, be somebody that's out there with their head up in the cloud. And we had other people that worried about earnings day to day, and they did a great job. But that's the role of the CEO, is to provide the cover to do those things that are required for long-term success.
And when you think about some of the things that you did that are now reflected in terms of the modern day Verizon that we know, can you give us some examples of nonlinear thinking that resulted in success?
I don't want this to come out as I'm taking credit for it, but you phrased the question. So we did a couple of things. So we separated our wireless business from our telephone business. We ran them separately. And in those days, people would say, no, there's one product and you ought to put them together and you ought to give customers a bottom of the bill discount. And we said, no, we don't think so. We're going to run them separately because this one's going to eat that one alive over time. And that's what's happened. So that was one thing we did. We were the first company to do that, actually. We separated them. We had a president of wireless and a president of telco. They used to fight internally, but we knew one was on a different trajectory to do that. So that's one thing we did. The other thing we did is we were big believers in investing in the wireless business. So we spent a lot of money investing in the wireless business, and I think the flagship issue for us was always the people who originally started the wireless business thought it was an extension of CB radio. They thought it was like a convenient thing to have, and it was a premium service for people who could afford to have a big phone that you could put in your car that didn't last very long. Calls used to be dropped every place, ineffective attempts. And so we were the first company that said, no, if this has to be a mainstream service. It has to be a substitute for your landline phone. And since I come out of the landline business, most of you would not know this, but we had a rule that when you picked up your landline phone and brought it to your ear, it had to be dial tone. There was never a time that if you picked it up and you didn't have dial tone that we were apoplectic. We would go crazy. And then the other issue is, of course, if your landline phone dropped a call, that was not good. So we had a long way to go in the wireless business to create that seamless quality. And out of that came famous, "Can you hear me now?" Okay, and that was a rallying cry. So that was the second thing we did that worked it. And then I think the thing that you're most familiar with is we decided that we were going to put fiber optics anywhere we could put fiber optics. So we built a fiber network because our engineers understood that wireless is terrific, but it only does so much. Physics won't allow wireless to completely replace a land-based network. So you know you need wireless, but you need a lot of fiber optics in between the towers, and that's what we did. So here we are, now heading to 5G, and all you hear about is wireless and fiber, right? So it's kind of like, I kind of sit back and say, this wasn't that hard to figure out, hard to do. And the people who are doing it really have a hard job. But the singular vision wasn't that hard.
Talk to me, though, about what you needed to do in order to have the right people and the right mindset for the challenges you were talking about. I mean, you worked at a monopoly initially, right? Modified final judgment, was it 84 or whenever Judge Green, when it all broke up. And then the evolution that you're talking about. Were there a lot of people who, frankly, either needed to change or go? And how do you deal with that?
I never was successful in getting the media to stop calling us a monopoly. You know? Here we are in 2018.
You gave me a dirty look just now.
I know. It drives me up a wall, Faber. I can't stand it. Okay, so...
reminds me of our actual interview.
Yeah, there you go.
He used to always give me dirty looks.
Yeah, right. So here's the way I would look at that. I learned this from other people, so this is not something I picked up. But we had a compelling engineering view of the world. So people... Think about us. We were probably the biggest construction and engineering company on the planet at the time. You know, us and AT&T and others. So we spent a lot of money on capital and putting in networks, and we did that. So we didn't have a consumer vision. And I think one of the things that one of our people figured out was this, "Can you hear me now?" would make us more likable to customers. So the way we addressed the people issue is we didn't try to line people up and say, well, you came from a monopoly background, you're a bad person, so we're going to get rid of you, and we're going to hire somebody from a consumer-based company. We focused on the people that cared about the customer. And as it turns out, the success of our company was driven by phone company lifers. They weren't driven by all these hotshots that you hire from Silicon Valley. Okay, now they're starting to hire more of those because the technology is sort of changing again. But so the issue that you had is we cared about quality service, consumers, and growth. People who cared about growth. When you work in a regulated monopoly, you care about low prices and costs, and you don't care about growth, because government doesn't care about growth. They just want your prices down. So we cared about growth and consumer and quality of service. And what happened is people rise to that challenge. They love to do that. And the people that did that better than others were the ones that survived, and the ones who couldn't quite get there, they moved on.
So did the culture change, or did it actually
Culture
prevail?
changed. Culture changed because we started measuring ourselves around quality of service instead of measuring ourselves the way government would measure us. How much money you're spending in that. You know, the first question analysts would say is how much capital are you going to spend? And the government would listen to that and they would say, how much capital are you going to spend? And whether you spent it wisely or not, they didn't care. They just wanted you to spend a lot of capital. But we figured out ways to deploy our capital so we were providing new products, new services, and higher quality service to customers. And I know it sounds simple.
Yeah, it does sound pretty simple.
But it is simple. You know, who does that well? I don't want to use them as an example all the time, but Amazon does that pretty well. They do that pretty well.
They also do something else. They innovate at scale pretty well at Amazon, which is not the easiest thing for a large organization to do either. Verizon has been able to do that to some extent.
We're working at that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a hard question. And now I think what that means, innovate at scale, is you find something you do well, then you do it, you multiply it over millions of customers. So one of the things the phone company never did well was when you called us up, it took a long time to get through an order with an agent. You know, we had a lot of things. The other thing we never really did well was that when you bought something from us, you called us back 5 times in the first week. Because either we didn't sell you the right thing or we didn't get the billing plan right. So we started measuring things like first call resolution. We started measuring things like no repeat calls. And so over the course of time, we started to see those numbers drop and customer satisfaction increase. Now, one of the things about the tech companies, whether it's Facebook or Google, they don't deal with the public. You deal with a machine or you deal with the internet. So, and they've done a great job at that. We have to deal with people. So we have to work through that. And here we are, I think, in 2018, and I think the whole industry's better, but I think our company is really further along in being easier to do business with and doing things the first time right and getting the bill right the first time right. And while we have a long way to go, we're better than we used to be.
Now, everybody wants to tell me, you know, you hear this a lot, well, we're also a technology, what we really are is a technology company. Everybody wants to sort of position themselves.
We want you to say that, David, because
Yes.
if you say that, then all of a sudden the value of $1 of revenue looks higher.
Right. Get a much higher multiple, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So the media is not cooperating with us. They're not.
Is Verizon a technology company?
You know, it's more of a technology company today than it was when I was there. So when you think the flagship product now is, quote, 5G, it's a technology company. It's built like that. Is IBM a technology company? I think they should be.
Yeah.
All right. So we have to earn our stripe on that. But customers like you to be a technology company, and investors like you to be a technology company. So it's natural for all of us to do that instead of being either a service company or a manufacturing company, which carries lower credentials in terms of investors. So there's always a tug of war on that. But forget that for a second. We want to be, in the eyes of our customers, a technology company.
You do, which means what, though? I mean, what are we even talking about when we say that?
Always have new products and services coming out. Always innovating. Always giving customers leading edge reasons why they want to come to us first. So here's an example. I look at Nike that way. Right? I mean, Nike, they make clothes, right? But they're a technology company. If I want to look cool, I'll go into Nike or to maybe one of the other companies and see what's the coolest new gym clothes they have, right? So you want to be a technology company in the eyes of your consumers.
Yeah. Lululemon's another one, right?
Yeah.
Conceivably, you can argue they're always sort of pushing the boundaries of, okay, what's next? What works? What
Right.
materials? All sorts of science.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, how many different T-shirts do you need to buy to find the one that really is the best technology? So you have to buy a lot of them. But it's kind of cool to do that. It's like golf balls. You keep buying golf balls to see which one goes further, right?
I want to talk a bit about leadership as well, and sort of your thoughts about it, and particularly given the time you've now had to reflect on your tenure and others that you've watched. What do you feel are some of the more important attributes? And where do you think you succeeded, and where do you think, if you could share, that you failed?
So leadership is a very soft term, right?
Yeah. And broadly can be defined in so many different ways.
Yeah, so when you think about it, from the CEO to the rest of the world, which is consultants and the media and all the people who want to write stories about what leadership is, there's one set of definitions to that. I was always taught that leadership starts with how your employees think of you. So the issue for me was, what did our employees think I was supposed to do? Right? And it's kind of like your kids at home. What do they think their parents are supposed to do? It's a different question than trying to answer the question from the standpoint of a consultant. So what did our employees think? Well, they wanted to know that everything that they did not control, I had my finger on. So the first thing they always asked me, where are we going? What's the future going to be like? So, and I can't say the future is, well, next year we're going to grow by 3%. The way we're going to grow is we're going to cut all these jobs on the left side of the room, and the right side of the room is going to be good. That's not leadership to them. So they wanted a positive vision of the future. So it took, I was a CEO for close to 16 or 17 years, so it took me the first 3 or 4 to realize I couldn't bluff that answer. I had to have an answer about the future. And so and of course, David, we would say, well, we're going to be global and we're going to buy all these companies and we're going to be a media company. And people didn't believe that. They didn't believe it. Until finally we said, you know what? We're going to run the best network that we can run. And people would say to me, I like that. Okay? And we said that. And of course, our stock went down when I said that, because people said, Ivan, you have no imagination when you say that. But we stuck to it. And now we have built on that theme. So leadership is, one thing about leadership, David, is you got to focus on the future. You have to have a compelling story to tell. Then you have to put your resources behind what you believe. And you have to consistently innovate against that to do that. Other thing leaders need to do, you have to be consistent, fair, and you have to listen. So people need to think there's a fair shot for everybody to contribute, and that you're not playing favorites, and you have a balanced program that covers all the employees. And we worked hard at that. So we had a code of conduct, we had training, and we tried to bring many people along, not just a few. So that's another aspect of leadership from the bottom up. You have to be able to communicate, you have to be able to tell your story, go through that. And then, of course, this is the hard part. You have to win once in a while. So you can't have a great story and it doesn't work. So it has to work. So you have to have the toughness to cut those things that don't, and the grit to make sure you're going to drive the behavior you need to drive to get things done. So, and people will rally around that. And there were plenty of companies that do that. You know, one of my favorite is Boring Company, FedEx. I had Fred Smith come in to talk to our senior managers a lot of times. So this is a guy that's been the CEO of FedEx for 42 years. Right? He started his company by borrowing some money to lease a plane so he could deliver packages from point to point. That's what he did.
Yeah.
That's Fred Smith. And look at him now. Right? And every time I would come in, I'd say, Fred, so what's your vision? He would look at me like I have no idea what he was doing. He would say, my vision is we're going to deliver packages everywhere in the world. And right now, I'm not delivering packages to 4 billion people out there. So he never got bored what he did. So if you look at FedEx, so think of how they innovate. There's a FedEx green, FedEx purple, FedEx yellow. So you get your package in 2 days or 3 days. It sounds really simple. He's done pretty well doing it. And
Yes.
I kind of think that's the way I thought about it. We want everybody in the world to have a phone. We want everybody else to talk. We want everybody to have bandwidth, everybody to have video. And there's a long way to go before we accomplish the goal.
Something you said about listening. You know, there are quite a few examples, I think, of companies that some people may know well, where the leadership was told what they wanted to hear, conceivably. And perhaps we're hearing things that, or not hearing things that they should have. How did you make sure that you sort of were really connected, for lack of a better term, to what was going on in the organization, and to making sure that you were getting both, you know, the good news, but also, even more importantly, I would think, the bad news?
I am sure that there are a line of people who would say I was tone deaf. I am sure of that. And so I don't have any view that somehow we were better listeners than others. But here's what I would say is that we had a process where we empowered different parts of our organization to be completely independent. And I made sure that those parts of the organizations were constantly giving us information. So let's take, for example, we had a very independent board of directors, very independent. And I'll take simple things. If we didn't send them out the materials in advance, they would call me up and go, this is not acceptable. If they didn't like the depth of the material, they would complain. And they were good that way. Now, they didn't know all the questions to ask, but they knew a lot of questions to ask. We had a completely independent financial organization. Now, a lot of companies, the financial organization also runs strategy, or maybe they run real estate, or maybe they run services. We had a pure financial organization. All they did is do the numbers. So their only job was to tell me bad news. Because nobody in a finance organization likes to tell you good news. It's not their job. I want to tell you the bad news. So we always had the bad news on the table. Our legal department, completely separate, independent, didn't have any other functions associated with that other than being the cop in the business. Then we had, over time, we developed consumer-oriented groups. So David, I'd like to think we've built a system of connections and information that sooner or later, some bad news would surface quicker than if people were trying to cover it up. Now, I worked I was on a board, I'll use his name because I love him, Larry Bossidy. Larry Bossidy was the CEO of Allied Signal. And he once told me, he said, Ivan, your only job is to find bad news. That's what he told me. And there's some of you in here, I've used that. So I used to go around the company, no matter how good things were, I would say, what's wrong? Okay, and I expected my senior team to do the same. So David, you have to build a reflex. It's much like the media. Norman Pearlstein once said to me during an interview, he was questioning me, and I said to him, what are you doing? What are all these questions? He said, I am looking for the information you're not telling me. I never forgot that, and that was a long time ago. That's what a CEO needs to be, and the CEO senior team needs to be. Now, there are plenty of examples out there now where you look around and you say, who was telling the CEO what? I don't want to point fingers, but there's plenty of companies like that that you really get nervous about.
I worked for one for a long time where there's a lot of people wondering what was going on.
Yeah.
GE, of course, is what I'm talking about, and it comes to mind because it's the kind of company that has fallen dramatically in terms of reputation and everything else, and you do wonder because there are skills in leadership that I can think about, Jeff Immelt, that he was extraordinarily good at. But I find myself as a reporter, frankly, and I think a lot of other people in that particular case, wondering, well, what did we miss? What did he miss? And what happened over the 15 plus years? His tenure was roughly as long as yours was.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything controversial, but I will say one point on that. So I was on Bossidy's board for a long time, and one of the tenets that came from GE and IBM over many years was that you could rotate senior executives every 2 or 3 years because their skills were transferable to other things. So they built a culture around saying, I'm going to take you, Don, and we're going to transfer you to some other function that you have no knowledge about, but because you're a great manager, you're going to be able to do it. We never did that in our company. Some people were generalists, but if you're a technologist, you're going to build a career in technology. If you're a marketing person, you're going to build a career in marketing. And I think the depth was missing in some of these companies because they don't have the reflexes to know what they don't know. And so if you're at an aerospace company, I don't want some HR person running an aerospace business. I want an aerospace person running an aerospace business. And so in the old days, that would be looked at as I was a Luddite. But I think now that we look back, you want professionals being able to do that. And people who have that. And you need a mix, but I think if there's one point of departure with that old way of thinking, is that management's not fungible. not when it comes to this world, this level of complexity, and this level of competition.
Right. Right. Well, there was this need to sort of have people believe in the conglomerate theme, the idea that one area could benefit another, and actually.
Yeah, let me make a comment. Daniel over here is the chief technology guy over at New York-Presbyterian. For years, they would have doctors run their IT system, or they have some retread from finance run their IT systems. Good people, but they didn't know. Then they bring in a professional, and now they're going to spend a lot of money to revamp their entire IT system. And when you ask him a question, he knows 16 answers before you even get finished. It gives you much more comfort, to your point, that the senior managers will be in a good position to know that. And you know, this is what NYSCi does. NYSCi helps people understand the depth of science, so people can ask a lot of questions and they can be curious and keep working on things to create the depth that's needed. You know the Chinese do this, you know the Koreans do this, you know the Japanese do this. So the people we're competing with aren't generalists. They are very specialized in the fields they have. And so we're dealing with a completely different level of, so I think our management approach has to be modified.
I want to talk a bit about the future. I also want to take questions, so if people have any, please start thinking about them. I want to talk about the future, but I'd love to go back a little bit. And do you remember the first time you saw this?
I did. I wrote it in the book.
Not this iteration, but the original one. And what you thought?
Well, I was at the Allen and Company conference out in Sun Valley. And, you know, everybody goes there to hang out with each other and see what kind of things you could do. And Bob Iger had one of these things in his hand. And when he saw me coming, he put it in his pocket. Okay? And because I worked at Verizon and he was at Disney, and Apple at the time was on the Disney board. Steve Jobs was. And, you know, I nosed around to say, what is that thing? And people said, it's pretty cool. It's a phone that does a lot of things you can't do. You know? So I went back to the office and I said to my team, what are they working on at Apple? And so our folks knew there was something going on, but they didn't quite know. But we were trying to figure out, because, you know, Steve Jobs is very, very secretive.
Yes.
Well, lo and behold, by poking around, and the fact that I think Steve got really mad at Bob Iger because he let other people even see.
Because he kept pulling it out.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, and so Steve Jobs came to see us. The Allen conference was early July. Steve Jobs came to see us in August. And he showed us a device, and all of us sat there with our jaw dropped. We knew this was a game changer, and we were screwed. It was going to change everything. Because it was going to take the phone network and all the stuff you used to do in your network and push it onto the phone. So that was not a good thing for us. And Steve just beat us up by saying, you have a bad network, you have bad services, this thing is much better, and all this kind of stuff. Well, we tried to convince him to carry it, let us carry it. He said no, because we didn't have the right architecture, and he wanted to distribute this globally, so a lot of reasons. So we lost the iPhone.
Yeah, for AT&T, of course.
We lost the iPhone. And so our response to that, getting to the chessboard strategy, is what we were going to do. So, make a long story short, we called up Google and said, you can't make one of those, but what could you do? And Google said, well, we can make Android. And we said, good. So they made Android, and they put it into Motorola and all these other devices. And we survived for a few years. I went to see Steve about 3 years later. He was failing at the time. And this is very interesting, because I said to him, what are you doing here?
He was failing health-wise.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And what were you doing here? And he said, Ivan, this is what I do. And he just changed the subject. We went back to work. And I said to him, so when are you going to let us carry the iPhone? And Steve, he said, well, you know, I'm very loyal to AT&T. I'm not going to go away from AT&T. But I have to tell you an anecdote. He said, I was in my dentist's office this week, and while he was fixing my cavity, he was complaining about his dropped calls on AT&T's network. And that's all he said. So I went back to the office and I said, Steve didn't say yes, but he gave us an opening. Then Lowell, my successor, he called up Tim Cook, who was at that time the assistant to the vice chair, I guess the president of Apple. And he said, here's what we're going to do. I know you guys are secretive. We think we have a really good network. You should really think about carrying our stuff on your iPhone, and he agreed to put in a tower on the Apple campus, free of charge, and we said, we don't want to know what you do with it, we won't ask any questions, just use it. A month later, they called us up and said, you have a deal. Because they could see how much more they can do on our network than they could on the previous network.
Well, I mean, it ended up being
that's the story of the iPhone. Quality work.
Right, and it ended up being a blessing and a curse for AT&T, right? I mean, their networks, I mean, they started to be known for drop calls. They started to be known for
John Stewart helped us
lack
with that.
of service.
Yeah. Well, that's their
In
issue.
part because they suddenly had all this new
Right.
capacity
So,
they had to carry.
I think if I were on AT&T's side, what I would say is we helped expand the market much bigger than it was, so they probably gained something from it, but we took a lot of their customers for a while.
But you knew the minute you saw it that it was going to change. I mean, not just for your company at the time, and not just what you're saying, as you said, that we're screwed, but did you understand the way it would fundamentally change?
So I don't deserve credit for that. What I deserve credit for is I came back and I snooped around and I asked a lot of questions to find out who knew about this. I didn't let it go. So the only thing I deserve credit for is I didn't know what I didn't know. But why would a guy like Iger walk around that conference showing off a device that didn't mean anything? So I didn't dismiss it. And some of our people knew. So I think to our credit, the people in our company, to their credit, they knew that the technology was enabling the intelligence to go into the phone rather than stay in the network. So but when we lost it, then we immediately jumped into plan B, which we called up Google. And we put a free tower on Google's premise, and we put a free tower any place else anybody wanted, and they were able to develop really exciting things. So I don't want to repeat this, but if you don't have a technology background, or at least a technical background in your field, your instincts wouldn't be to follow up that way. So, I don't want to pick on GE, but how could you be an expert in making washing machines and building airplanes at the same time? You can't do it.
Right. Are there questions that we can take from people in the audience? Anybody?
Your board was not a bunch of pushovers, but you got them to follow you through some really challenging directions and decisions. What was the hardest, or how did you do it?
I don't think there's any secret. I think in our case, you might find this funny, but every meeting we would tell them we were going to go out of business. Right? We would say that we maybe have another year or two left, but then we're dead in the water. We can't grow. And directors, and you do this at NYSCi, if you get your directors focused on tomorrow's business, meaning well, let's take NYSCi, because I'm guilty of this. So I can say to Margaret or you and say, so what's the visitorship going to be next quarter? So that's it. We could get all hung up on that. That may be not the best use of the board's time. The issue should be, what do you think the visitorship should be in 3 years? What do we need to do now to get there in 3 years? That's what we used to do with our board. We would extend the horizon and say that cable companies are going to put us out of business. Google's going to put us out of business. Amazon's going to disrupt the value chain. They're going to put us out of business. Cisco's going to put us out of business. And we would create all these conversations about why our growth is going to be stunted by someone else, and what do we need to do. No director wants to be on a board on a company that doesn't have a vision of the future to grow. So I think that's the issue. So our board developed the habit of really focusing on what it took to be successful longer term. And therefore, they approved the expenditures of billions of dollars worth of buying spectrum and billions of dollars in investing in fiber. And now we had to deliver. So along the way, we had to show that we were making progress. I would just say this, because David probably knows this better than most people. Verizon was always accused of spending more money than the other people. And analysts used to love to complain about all the capital we were spending. But what's interesting is, all the companies who weren't spending the capital, their stocks weren't trading any better than us. So my view was, we're all being treated reasonably the same, and if we're spending more now, it's going to pay off in the future. And today, when Verizon announced its earnings, it was very funny. They asked the CEO, how much capital did you spend? And he was spending significantly less than any other company. And yet he had the best growth. And of course, some of these analysts, you want to kill them, but they wrote, oh, he didn't tell us the whole truth. But the answer is, they've spent a lot of money to put themselves in a position to be more efficient. And that's where they are. So, Frank, others, if you spend the money and you do it wisely, it's going to pay off. No guarantee. And you do. I know you do. I know you do that. And you have to lower your prices.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry. It's so great to hear you, and I'm looking forward to reading the book. There's a story that occurred while you were running Verizon, and it's one of the saddest stories, I think, about technology that I've ever known, and it's BlackBerry. It was such a boom. You know, if you had thought back in the early 2000s that BlackBerry wouldn't be around for 40 years, it would seem impossible. And of course, iPhone did come out, but BlackBerry had all their servers at all these companies. BlackBerry had millions of dedicated thumb tappers. And I still wish I had a BlackBerry today. Well, there you go. You know, you witnessed their rise and their fall, and I'm curious just your analysis of what happened and what they could have done. I still wish they were alive. It's a sad story for me personally, but
they still are alive.
They're still alive, but not to the extent that I think even consumers would like them to.
You know, there's a lot of Motorola, same thing.
And all that market cap went from them to Apple.
So I don't have the answer to that. I just have an instinct about it. Okay, so all those companies that we just mentioned develop proprietary products for a slice of the market, and none of them ever developed an open architecture to apply their products across a broader array. So they ran out of room to scale. And Google absolutely, as David said, has spent their money to make sure everything they do scales across all markets. We built our network to be an open architecture. We were the first company to have open wholesale. We bitch about it, but we still did it. So I think part of the issue is they fell in love with their market position, and they refused to believe that anybody had the resources to run up against them and overtake them. And I think that's a big mistake. You could look at almost a lot of companies. Sony had the same problem. Sony would have all these devices in your house, but you had to buy another Sony device to get the next function. They didn't integrate their planning. So I think part of it is they were very silo-driven, and they were very quarter-to-quarter driven. And then all of a sudden, they're gone. And they'll come back, but they'll have to come back in a different way. Now, you just mentioned about R&D.
Yeah, I mentioned that Google's now spends more on CapEx than does Verizon or AT&T, and that's only the last year or two.
Well, that's because their competitors are spending more on R&D. And now in Google's case, it's very interesting. So they're spending a lot of money on capital on things that aren't their core.
Many things.
Okay, so let's assume some of those things will work. I mean, we have a nephew who works at Google who's working on this project to figure out how to way to neutralize mosquitoes who have disease. Okay, he's got a great project. He's all over the planet, and I'm saying to him, Matt, what are you doing with this project? Well, we're going to save the world because we're going to get rid of all the mosquitoes who carry diseases. But here's the thing that Google's not doing. So how much are they spending to make the next generation of search better? So I think they're doing pretty well. But my guess is 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, somebody's going to come up with a great platform for visual search. And Google's going to try to catch up to it. And maybe they haven't, but you don't read anything about them doing it. Apple's another one that has this enormously successful run. I mean, they're pretty cool, really are. But at some point, if they don't go to an open architecture, somebody's going to overtake them.
You think so? I mean, I've been hearing that a long time, and it is now a $1 trillion market cap. I was hearing that when it was like 200
No, I'm
billion.
not saying you shouldn't buy their stock and you shouldn't buy their product, but the law of big numbers is going to take over at some point. And so here's what it takes, though. You don't have to overtake Apple. All you have to do is eat at their growth. So this was the problem that our industry had. So you said we had a monopoly, which means that we should have been pretty good. We should have been able to make money forever, right? But what happened is all these other companies introduced little things, so we did not grow. The only way we could make money is cut costs and raise prices. And this is where Apple will be over the next 5 to 10 years, which is all these little alternatives. So when you think about it, this is the first time that Samsung has a device that actually competes with Apple. And they've tried it hard, and they're not going away. They're going to keep trying at it. So we love it because the more Apples there are, the more people will use the underlying services that we provide. So it's kind of cool for us. So I'm not indicating that Apple's got any bad run anymore. But at some point, there will be competitors that will figure it out. Same thing with Google. At some point, there will be alternatives to some of the things that Google does.
5G is here. So Verizon has started in a handful of cities. How impactful is that going to be? What kind of change is that going to bring when it really becomes a more robust offering?
Yeah, so there are people in the audience who are much more technically competent than I am on this, but just at a high level. So what's 5G? 5G is just more wireless, but here's what it does. It will multiply your bandwidth by 10 and reduce the latency, the speed of connection, by 100. So that'll make it as reliable as sitting at your computer and doing whatever transactions you want to do. So you could actually look at x-rays across the country. You could do operations robotically. You could do so many things with high quality, perfect connections. And that it's not up to us to figure out all the use cases. They will come. So whether it's electric cars or it's in healthcare, it's all coming. And it all requires a 5G network. And so for us, it's a never-ending quest to make sure that wherever you are, in the fourth basement at 10 Hudson Yards or on the roof, it works. Okay, or you're walking around Manhattan with all the tall buildings, it works. So we have a job to make sure that the reliability of this meets the expectations that people will have about the use cases that will come along. So 5G, Lowell has said, is absolutely the beginning of another transformational in terms of industrial revolution. I believe that.
Do you?
Oh yeah, I know, I do. You went from analog to digital, you went from copper to coax to fiber. You can just see the capacity. And now you're going to go to kind of the ultimate. So what comes after 5G? Well, 6G will come along, but 6G will be more compression, so you'll pack more bits. So what we're talking about here is a world in which connectedness is no longer a barrier to getting education to people, getting healthcare to people, getting anything that the distribution systems today block. So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. Now, we just have a little role in it. We just want to make sure we use our services to connect your point to point, but it's a big deal.
Well, the network is the most important part of it.
It's
in many places.
well, yeah. I mean, well, you're in the media business. People used to say the network is a commodity and the media is the attractive thing. Our view is, as they digitize you, David, and then they have this little sort of icon that looks like you, that could do what you do,
yes.
The network becomes more important.
So I'm going to be replaced. It sounds like fairly soon.
Not yet.
Not yet.
They'll never replace you, but they'll try.
You're right. The lack of latency, I think, I did not recognize the importance of that. People may not fully understand it or less.
Well, give me the number. You guys know the number. What's the forward case on latency? It's 100 times, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Which means you don't need the computing power in here. You don't need, or in your home. It can all be on the edge of the network,
If
right?
you want it there, it could be there, but it could be somewhere else, right?
Right,
Yeah,
because
so-
everything this can do now and all the stuff they pack this with conceivably could be in the network, given there's not going to be any delay.
No delay. What are you planning into your network in terms of latency? 8 mils, 10 mils?
Microseconds.
Microseconds.
For national transfer.
Right. Okay, so think about it.
Not much international.
Yeah, so, I mean, and that'll come down even. But by the way, every CIO, particularly on Wall Street, who wants to trade, their companies, they always call up the carriers and say, we want faster connection. So 10 years ago, it used to be 40 milliseconds to do a transaction. Now it's down to 6. It'll get under 1. So, but you think now you apply that to other aspects of use cases, it's enormously impactful.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Kritika. I'm from the Seidenberg School. First of all, thank you for all your support. You mentioned how important it is for having professionals, people who are good at what they do. And as a new grad, what would you recommend? Picking something up, deciding what you want to do, and focus on it, be the best you can at it, or actually looking at the broad horizon and looking at the different options that you could explore.
So I agree with that. I do. So, you know, Phyllis and I, we told our kids this, you know, when they went to college. I'm just giving away my own personal view of this. So if you want to major in liberal arts, it's like, okay, but you better learn something else beside that, or you better dig deep and be the best writer, or the best communications person, or the best educator. But in this world, you need to be skilled at things you do. So when I look at my own career, I didn't really have a skill set. I went to work for the company, and what fell in my lap was during the 60s and 70s and early 80s, there was all this confusion about the financial structure that drove AT&T. Tariffs, sharing, and all that kind of stuff. So I became an expert on the financial architecture of the old Bell system. And so I spent the first 15 years of my senior executive tour helping our company and the industry unwind the monopoly financial structure. I wasn't the engineer, I wasn't the marketing person. So that was my contribution. And as it turns out, I became the go-to person to help that happen. So how did we structure all these mergers and acquisitions? Because we understood how the government thought about it and how the financial structures were. Now, while we were doing that, other people filled these other roles. So I think today in business, whether you're in IT or you're in consumer segmentation or you're in product development, you really have to be good at what you do. That will give you the license to be able to do other things. But if you're a generalist and all you want to do is, and I hate to say this, but sometimes employees, they come into the company and they want to know, how long is it going to take me to be a vice president? And usually that answer is probably a long time. Okay? But if they learn something and they make a contribution and they become a go-to to that, they really get it done. Rudin's sitting there, he knows. You know, you hire your people, they better know real estate, right? They better know real estate.